The woman stands in front of the kitchen sink. It is 6:30 in the morning. She holds a cup of coffee that has grown cold while she stared into space. Outside, the sound of traffic has already begun. Horns, engines, the mechanical rhythm of another day just like any other. She doesn't move. She just breathes. And in that breath, there is something that no one sees. The weight of waking up knowing that all of this will repeat itself tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Until one day, it simply doesn't repeat itself anymore. She doesn't think about it consciously, but she feels it, deep in her chest, in the silence between one breath and another. That feeling of being alive but not exactly living, of functioning but not existing. She puts the cup in the sink, grabs her bag and leaves. The door closes behind her, and life goes on. Everyone lies when they say they're fine. No one wakes up early, drinks cold coffee, and spends 2 hours in traffic because they love life. You know that. You know that most people don't live, they just endure. But here's the problem. No one can endure the naked truth for long. No one can spend the whole day thinking that all of this, work, commitments, plans, relationships, will end. That one day you just won't wake up anymore, and that nothing you've done will have prevented it. So you do what everyone else does. You distract yourself. You occupy your mind. Notifications, empty conversations, TV shows you don't even like, debts that keep you tied to the future, anything to keep going. Because stopping is dangerous. Stopping means thinking. And thinking means facing the one question you've been avoiding since childhood. Why does all this exist if it's going to end? There's a Norwegian philosopher named Peter Wessel Zapffe who had the courage to answer that question in a way no one wanted to hear. He said, "Consciousness is a mistake, a defect of nature. We are the only animals that know they are going to die. And yet we are forced to live as if this knowledge does not slowly destroy us from within." Don't you feel that too? That emptiness that appears on Sunday nights, when the music stops, when the feed goes quiet, when the room darkens and the silence weighs heavily. The truth is unbearable. So we invent lies, beautiful lies, useful lies. You call them purpose, you call them faith, you call them hope. Zapffe called them defenses against reality. He said there are 4 psychological mechanisms that humans have created. Not to find the truth, but to avoid going crazy with it. And you use these 4 mechanisms every day, without realizing it, without choosing. They keep you going, but they also keep you trapped. Maybe you don't want to know this. Maybe it's easier to keep pretending. But if you stayed this far, it's because something inside you already knows. You've already felt it. That discomfort that no one names. That feeling that you're playing a role, but you've forgotten the script. And now for the first time, someone is going to show you what's behind the curtains. Not to save you, not to give you hope, but to show you how you really work. And maybe, just maybe, when you understand the lies that sustain your life, you can choose which ones are worth keeping. Because the truth is this, you can't live without illusions, but you can choose yours. And that choice, however small it may seem, is the only real freedom you have. Every child discovers death before the age of 7. And almost every child stops asking about it after the age of 8, not because they understand, but because they realize that no one wants to talk about it. It's as if everyone at some point silently signed a contract. We don't talk about things that scare us. This is the first defense mechanism that Zapffe described, denial. But denial is not just refusing to accept facts. It is not simply closing your eyes. Denial is cutting off pieces of your own consciousness to make life bearable. When a human being becomes self-aware, it is like being thrown into an endless abyss. Denial is the false staircase that pretends to lead to safety. You see the pact of denial everywhere, in superficial conversation, in empty motivational phrases, in how we normalize daily suffering as just life. How many times have you seen someone ask, "Are you okay?" and accept, "Yes, I'm fine," as a true answer, even when the person's eyes were screaming for help? How many times have you been that person? How many times have you said, "I'm fine," just to end the conversation quickly? Because the alternative would be to break down right there, in front of someone who is probably not prepared to hold you. And you know that. Everyone knows that. So we deny it. We deny the pain we feel. We deny the exhaustion we carry. We deny the fear that wakes us up at 3 in the morning. And we call it strength. We call it maturity. But deep down, it's just survival. We deny death as if it were optional. As if, by not talking about it, we could postpone it indefinitely. We deny the fragility of the body, the randomness of fate, the possibility that everything could fall apart tomorrow. Because admitting that you have no control, that life isn't fair, that effort isn't always worth it, would be like opening a door that you can no longer close. It would be looking directly at the fact that you are on a moving train with no brakes, no certain destination, and that one day simply the train will stop. And then what? No one wants to answer that question, so we pretend it doesn't exist. We have been trained not to think, to smile while we sink, and denial works, not because it's true, but because it's necessary. Zapffe saw this with brutal clarity. He said that humans have developed a level of consciousness that nature never intended for survival. In his words, we are a failed experiment of evolution, because every other animal lives in the present. A lion doesn't think about death while hunting. A bird doesn't question the meaning of life while building its nest, but you think, you question, you know you're going to die, and you carry that knowledge every day like an invisible weight that no one else can see. That's why we need to deny it, not as a choice, but as a mechanism for psychological survival, because too much awareness without defense is unsustainable. It's like looking directly at the sun. You can't stand it for long. Think about hospitals. In many cultures, doctors still hide the whole truth from terminally ill patients. They say it's for the patient's own good, but in reality, it's to keep the pact of denial intact. Because a person who sees too clearly can infect everyone around them with awareness. And that's dangerous. It breaks the silent harmony that keeps everyone functioning. If one patient starts shouting, "I'm going to die and none of this makes sense," the other patients start thinking too. And thinking is the first step toward collapse. So the doctor smiles. He says there is hope. He says the treatment is working, even when it isn't. And everyone agrees to believe it. Because the alternative is to face the naked truth, that medicine has limits, that the body fails, that there are no guarantees, and no one wants to live with that truth staring them in the face. So we continue to deny. We deny instability. We deny chance. We deny inevitable pain. We deny inevitable loss. We cover up tragedy with comforting words. We call it a challenge. We call it a lesson. We call it purpose. We say that everything happens for a reason because it's easier than admitting that sometimes things just happen. Without reason, without logic, without justice. But it's the same old defense at work. Don't talk, don't think, don't feel, or the abyss will swallow you. But the abyss never went away. It was always there, waiting, just below the surface of every polite conversation, every forced smile, everything's fine. It waits, patiently, because it knows that eventually denial fails. And when it fails, there is nothing left between you and the truth. And those who dare to look at it without filters, without anesthesia, risk understanding too much. And as Zapffe said, to understand is to suffer, because understanding means seeing that there is no safety net, that there is no divine plan, that there is no cosmic justice ensuring that good wins in the end. To understand means to accept that you are fragile, temporary, replaceable, that the universe doesn't care if you are happy or sad, alive or dead. And that's not poetic. It's not liberating. It's just the truth. And the truth, without defenses, hurts. That's why most people prefer not to understand. They prefer the comforting lie, the well-constructed illusion, functional denial. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because maybe it's the only way to wake up every day and keep going, to make coffee, to sit in traffic, to talk about the weather, to live as if death didn't exist. Even though you know it does. You don't know the name of the child who starved to death yesterday. And deep down, you'd rather not know. Because if you did, you'd have to feel something real. And feeling something real could collapse the fragile system that keeps you going. You've built a bubble. And inside that bubble, life goes on. Sugar in your coffee, emails, the same jokes on WhatsApp, the same road to work, the same excuse for not thinking too much. You call this a well-organized life. Zapffe called it existential isolation. But here's the problem. Denial has its limits. You can close your eyes to a lot of things. You can pretend that everything is fine. You can smile and say you're coping. But there are realities that are too big to ignore. The death of someone close to you, an illness, a sudden loss, a moment when life forces you to look. When that happens, denial no longer works. And you need another strategy. You need something stronger. Something that doesn't deny the pain, but locks it away in a place where you never have to look at it again. You need the second mechanism, and it's working in you right now as you read this, because if it weren't, you would have stopped reading already. You would have closed this page. You would have gone back to your normal life, but you didn't close it, because something in you wants to understand, and something in you is afraid of what you will discover. The world is falling apart, but your bubble of routine remains intact. You drink the same coffee. You answer the same emails. You watch the same news. And when someone mentions a distant war, a tragedy on another continent, a silent injustice happening right now, you feel a brief discomfort, a tightness in your chest, a feeling that you should do something, feel something, be someone better. And then you go back to what you were doing. Not because you're cruel, not because you don't care, but because you've learned to isolate yourself. Zapffe called this existential isolation. Human beings isolate disturbing experiences. They lock them away in psychic boxes, like storing poison in labeled jars. Not opening these boxes is an unconscious choice, and a necessary one. Because if your consciousness were to open completely to all the pain, all the injustice, all the chaos and absurdity of existence, you would collapse. That's why you don't see. Not because you are blind, but because you have learned not to look. It's different. Blindness is the absence of vision. Isolation is selective vision. It is knowing that something exists, but keeping a safe psychic distance. Like knowing there is rotten meat in the refrigerator, but never opening the door. You know it's there. You smell it sometimes. But as long as the door is closed, you can pretend it doesn't exist. And that's how you manage to function. That's how you manage to wake up, work, smile, plan for the future. Because if you really felt, deeply, viscerally, the pain of all the children starving right now, of all the elderly dying alone right now, of all the animals being tortured right now, you wouldn't be able to get out of bed. You would be paralyzed, crushed by the weight of reality. Isolation works like software running silently in the background, filtering, cutting, silencing, keeping the horror far enough away that you can still function. And society rewards this blindness. It calls it emotional stability. It calls it focus. It calls it productivity. But what is emotionally stable in a world that collapses daily? Syrian children buried under rubble, elderly people dying alone in nursing homes, animals ground up alive to become animal feed, forests burning, oceans dying. All of this is happening right now, as you read this. But your brain can't handle it. So you do what everyone else does. You compartmentalize, you shut down, you lock it away. And you call it sanity. But it's just isolation at work, protecting you from yourself. Here's the inescapable part. Isolation isn't just individual. It's collective. It's cultural. It's institutionalized. That's why you can go months without hearing about the war in Sudan. But you never miss an update on a celebrity couple's fight. The information is there, available, a click away. But you've been trained to avoid it. Because the media knows. Society knows. If people really paid attention to everything that's going on in the world, there would be mass psychological collapse. So the system offers you carefully calibrated distraction, entertainment, gossip, scandal, anything to keep your attention away from what really matters. And you accept it because it's easier, because it's more comfortable, because touching reality too directly is like touching an exposed electrical wire. You feel everything at once, and for a second you understand too much. Zapffe wrote, "Excessive lucidity paralyzes." And it's true. When you see too clearly, when the insulation fails and you feel everything at once, you can't move, you can't make decisions, you can't act. Because action presupposes that something matters, that there is a right way, that it's worth trying. But when you're seeing the enormity of suffering, the scale of absurdity, the inevitability of the end, how do you choose what to do? How do you decide whether to go to work or stay in bed? Whether to pay the bills or just stop? Everything seems equally meaningless. So humanity protects itself with glass domes for the mind. Domes made of distraction, superficiality, and comfortable silence. You think you're safe, but safety and blindness are not the same thing. Isolation allows you to continue, but it doesn't free you. It only postpones. It postpones the moment when you will have to look at what is locked inside you, at the pain you never fully felt, at the loss you never mourned, at the fear you never named, at the anger you never expressed. All of it is there, waiting, accumulating. And the longer you isolate it, the heavier it gets. It doesn't disappear. It just rots in silence, like that meat in the refrigerator. One day you open the door and the smell is so strong it knocks you down. And you realize you should have dealt with it before, but it was easier not to open it. It was easier to pretend it didn't exist, until the day the box opens by itself. And when that happens, when all the isolated pains explode at once, you understand why you spend so much time avoiding looking. But isolation alone is not enough either, because there is still one question it does not answer. You can deny death. You can isolate suffering. You can filter reality until it fits on a cell phone screen. But the biggest challenge of all remains, making sense of what's left. You need solid ground. You need a ready answer to the question, why am I here? You need something to tell you that all of this, the effort, the sacrifice, the pain is worth it, even if that answer is a lie. And that's where the third mechanism comes in, the most seductive, the most dangerous. Because unlike denial and isolation, which only protect you, this mechanism promises something more. It promises meaning. It promises purpose. It promises that all of this makes sense, that you are here for a reason, that your life has value, that your pain has a purpose, and you believe it, because you need to believe it, because the alternative is to admit that maybe you are just existing, without a script, without direction, without any guarantee of reward. And no one wants to live like that. You believe in things you never chose. You love the country where you were born, but you didn't design its flag. You defend a religion, but it came to you through geography, not revelation. You value traditions that your grandparents repeated without question, and you call that conviction. But it isn't. It's heritage. It's conditioning. It's cultural habit. Zapffe called it anchoring. And it's not about finding the truth. It's about finding a safe harbor in a chaotic sea. Because human beings can't stand emptiness. They can't bear to know that they are floating in an indifferent universe, without a manual, without justice, without the promise of reward. So we plant roots, in myths, in symbols, in traditions. We cling to ideas of family, nation, God, legacy, not because they are real, but because without them everything seems unbearably random. Anchoring is the mechanism that transforms chaos into narrative, that takes chance and gives it a beautiful name, that looks at suffering and says, this has a purpose. You live to be a good father, a good mother, a good citizen, because you were told that this is noble. But have you ever wondered if these roles liberate you or consume you? If you chose them or if they were chosen for you? Soldiers die for causes they don't understand. Parents suffocate their children by repeating patterns they never questioned. Believers spread hatred in the name of love. And everyone believes they are doing the right thing because they have anchored their lives to something greater than themselves. And once anchored, it is difficult to let go, because letting go means floating again. It means losing your footing. It means facing the possibility that maybe there is no ground at all. It's not about attacking values. It's about asking where they come from. And who benefits from your obedience? Because anchoring, as necessary as it may be, is also a prison. You live within a script that someone wrote before you were born, and you call it purpose. You call it identity. But identity is not who you are. It's who you were told you should be. It's the role you agreed to play so that the system continues to function. And the system works very well when everyone stays in their place. When the worker works. When the father provides. When the citizen obeys. When the believer believes. Everyone anchored. Everyone secure, everyone trapped. Think about how this works in practice. You grow up hearing that you need to study, graduate, get a stable job, get married, have children, buy a house. That's the cultural anchor you've been given, and you pursue it. Not because you stop to think if it's what you really want, but because everyone around you is doing the same thing. And when everyone is doing it, it seems like it must be right. It seems like there must be some meaning in it. But what if there isn't? What if it's just a story we repeat because our parents repeated it? Because their parents repeated it? A chain of inherited meanings that no one has ever stopped to question. You work 40 years at something you don't love to buy things you don't need to impress people who don't care. And you call it success. You call it responsibility. But it's just anchoring at work, keeping you busy enough not to notice that you're stuck. Zapffe saw this craving for meaning as a sign of panic. We are not rational beings. We are terrified beings pretending to be calm. And in desperation, any story will do, as long as it protects us from the vertigo of not knowing why we are here. Even science becomes an anchor when it turns into blind faith. When you believe that technology will solve everything, that progress is inevitable, that humanity is evolving into something better. But look around. We are more connected and more alone, more informed and more confused, more free and more trapped. The anchor of science promises control. It promises certainty. It promises that if we understand enough, we can fix everything. But some things cannot be fixed. Some things simply are. Even love becomes an anchor when it justifies fear and dependence. When you say you can't live without someone. When you make another person the meaning of your existence. When you need them to complete you. Because if they complete you, it means that you alone are incomplete. And you are, but not in the romantic sense. You are incomplete because every human being is incomplete. Because consciousness is fragmentation. And love, most of the time, is just two fragmented people clinging to each other so they don't sink. We call this a deep connection, but it's just shared fear. It's just double loneliness. And when it ends, because it almost always ends, you realize you were using another person as an anchor, and now you're floating again. And the question comes back, who am I without this? And the answer scares you, because maybe you're nothing but the anchors you've chosen. You don't have to believe in anything to be free, but freedom is scary, because it offers no promises. It doesn't say it will work out. It doesn't guarantee you'll be happy. It just says you can choose. And choosing is terrifying when you realize there is no right answer, that there is no safe path, that you are alone with your decisions and their consequences. That's why most people continue to believe in flags, in creeds, in ready-made scripts, not because they are true, but because they maintain the feeling that there is meaning, that there is a reason, that you are here for something greater than biological chance. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you need anchors. Maybe it's impossible to live without them. But here's the question no one wants to ask. What if you could choose your anchors? What if instead of inheriting ready-made meanings, you could create your own? Not because they are true, but because they are yours. Because you looked into the void, felt the vertigo, and consciously decided where to plant your roots. That's not illusion. That's freedom. Freedom is not living without lies. It is choosing which lies are worth keeping, which stories are worth telling, which roles are worth playing. Not because they will save you, but because they will make existence bearable, and maybe even beautiful, in its own way. But there is a problem. Even when you choose your anchors, even when you deny and isolate and cling to something, there is still a kind of pain that doesn't fit in any box. A pain that doesn't go away. That can't be resolved. That accepts no explanation. And when that happens, when the pain is too great to hide and too deep to ignore, you do the only thing left to do. You turn it into something else. You polish it. You shape it. You make it into something that can be seen without destroying you. You create. And in that perhaps lies both the greatest beauty and the greatest tragedy of human existence. Every masterpiece begins with a cry that no one could silence. What we call art often begins with pain. What we call beauty is sometimes just suffering polished until it shines enough not to kill those who feel it. Zapffe said that since humans cannot destroy suffering, they try to transform it into language. We sublimate. We transform tragedy into expression, into art, into theory, into music, into poetry. Not because it saves us, but because it entertains us long enough to keep us alive. Sublimation becomes essential because it does not heal. It just rearranges the pain into something we can look at without completely falling apart. Think of the torn poet writing about absence, the suicidal musician composing songs of hope, not because they are well, but because it's either that or permanent silence. Van Gogh painted sunflowers while his mind collapsed. Sylvia Plath wrote brilliant verses before putting her head in the oven. Kurt Cobain created anthems for an entire generation while struggling to keep breathing. You admire them. You put their works in museums, you sing their songs, but you forget that they were bleeding while they created, and that the world only applauded when it was too late. They sublimated the pain, but they didn't survive it. Sublimation delays collapse. It doesn't prevent it. It is the most intelligent mechanism because it is the most complex. Unlike denial or isolation, sublimation looks absurdity straight in the eye, but it covers it with metaphor. Pain becomes art. Emptiness becomes philosophy. Death becomes poetry. But underneath it all, it is still chaos framed in gold. Zapffe saw this with brutal clarity. Even the deepest philosophies, the grandest ideologies, the most beautiful works of art are human constructs designed to make life seem less like a tragic mistake. They are beautiful, but they are still constructs. They are still defenses. They are still ways of making bearable what in its raw form would be unbearable. Think about how this works in your life. Maybe you are not an artist. Maybe you've never painted a picture or written a poem, but you sublimate every day. When you turn frustration into a joke, when you tell a difficult story in a way that makes it bearable, when you take a painful experience and find a lesson in it, that's sublimation. You're taking something that hurts and turning it into something that can be shared, processed, digested. Without that, the pain would remain trapped inside you, formless, with no way out, just burning. Sublimation gives you an escape valve, but like any valve, it has its limits. And when those limits are exceeded, when the pressure is too great, it fails, and then no art can hold it back. Modern science shows that our brains are programmed to find patterns where none exist. It's an evolutionary trick. Finding meaning helps us avoid paralysis. And that's exactly what sublimation does. It transforms screams into stories. You can call it art, you can call it religion, you can call it love, you can call it literature. But underneath, it's suffering trying to be useful, trying to justify itself, trying to say, if I suffered, at least let it mean something. But what if it doesn't? What if beauty is just a makeup of despair? What if sublimation, however sophisticated, is just another way of postponing the inevitable encounter with the truth that none of this needs to make sense? Sublimation lets you go on, but it also keeps you trapped. Because even when you turn pain into gold, it's still pain. Polished, decorated, sold, applauded, but untouched. The wound doesn't heal. It just becomes beautiful enough to be displayed. And perhaps that is the only truth that remains. Humans are the only creatures who suffer and still try to make poetry out of it, who look into the abyss and decide to paint it, who feel the pain and decide to sing about it, not because it works, but because it's all we have. And perhaps in the end, that is the greatest courage, not to deny, not to isolate, not to anchor, but to look directly at what hurts and say, I'm going to make this into something others can see, even if it destroys me in the process. And there is something beautiful in that, something deeply human, the ability to take the worst of existence and turn it into something that connects people. That makes someone on the other side of the world feel, me too. Sublimation creates bridges, bridges made of shared pain. And these bridges, however fragile they may be, are all we have to keep us from being completely alone. When you read a poem that expresses exactly what you felt but couldn't name, something happens. You realize you're not the only one, that someone else felt it too, survived long enough to put it into words, and left you this gift, this map, this proof that it is possible to get through. If you made it this far, I need to tell you something honestly. Very few people can look at reality without anesthesia. Very few have the courage to take off their masks and keep breathing. You didn't just stay. You felt, you thought, you allowed yourself to be disturbed. And for that alone, you are already supporting this work in a powerful way. Because every person who watches until the end, who shares, who talks about it with someone, helps this message stay alive in a world where every honest effort for truth is fragile and needs breath to survive. If you want to go further, if you want to help keep a raw, unfiltered consciousness alive, you can subscribe to this channel. Because what we're doing here isn't entertainment, it's resistance. It's keeping alive a conversation that most people would rather shut down. But here's what no one tells you. Even with all these mechanisms, denial, isolation, anchoring, sublimation, there still comes a time when none of it works. A moment when all defenses collapse at once, and you are left alone with the naked truth. No metaphor, no anesthesia, no escape. Most people only think seriously about life after losing someone, because there is no philosophy more honest than grief. And when you are standing in front of a coffin, none of the four lies work anymore. You can study religions. You can go to therapy. You can read all the self-help books. You can repeat all the optimistic mantras you can find. But none of that makes sense in front of a coffin. There are no metaphors there. There are no lessons. There is no this too shall pass. Only silence and emptiness. And the brutal awareness that that person, with all their history, their memories, their fears, their hopes, has simply ceased to exist. And nothing you do will bring them back. Zapffe called this awakened consciousness without escape. Life became conscious of itself, and it collapsed under the weight of that consciousness. Everything we build, family, career, spirituality, art, exists to distract us from this collapse. But when all defenses fail, what remains? The truth. And the truth is simple. There is no guaranteed meaning, none. The universe owes you no justice. Existence does not need a reason. You were born because two bodies met, not because some cosmic purpose chose you. Pain is not a test. Tragedy is not a lesson. Death is not a door to something else. These are just pretty words we invent so we don't go crazy. You know this. Deep down you've always known. But admitting it is different from knowing it. Admitting it is looking in the mirror and recognizing that you've spent your whole life running from something that never went away. That all your achievements, all your relationships, all your beliefs are just sophisticated ways of avoiding this central truth. You are temporary. And when it's over, there will be nothing. No continuation, no next chapter, no heavenly reward. Just the end. And that's not poetic. It's not comforting. It's not enlightening. It's just a fact. A fact you've carried since the day you understood you were going to die. You were about 6 or 7 when you realized it. Maybe you saw a dead animal. Maybe you lost a grandparent. Maybe you just overheard adults talking. And suddenly, you knew. One day I will cease to exist. And in that moment, something inside you broke. And innocence was lost. And you were never the same again. You spent your whole life trying to forget that discovery. Building defenses. Accumulating distractions. Creating meanings. All so you wouldn't have to look directly at that truth again. Zapffe was radical, but he was honest. He proposed something that most people reject without even considering it. He said that the only truly ethical act would be to prevent another conscious being from suffering the same curse. This is the basis of existential antinatalism. It is not hatred for life. It is extreme compassion. Not bringing a new life into the world is not rejection. It is respect for the weight of existence. Because you know what it is like to carry consciousness. You know what it is like to wake up at 3 in the morning with your heart racing, thinking about death. You know what it is like to feel empty even when you are surrounded by people. You know what the pain of existence is, so why pass it on? Why create another being who will have to carry the same burden? You can call it radical, nihilistic, pessimistic, but that's just what people say when they don't want to look directly at the truth. Pessimism does not wish evil. It merely admits that evil exists, and that it may be embedded in the very structure of reality. There is no redemption for consciousness. It is, as Zapffe wrote, the open wound of the cosmos, and every new conscious being that is born is a new wound, a new creature condemned to know that it will die, to feel pain, to seek meaning where there is none, to build defenses that will inevitably fail. Is it cruel? Perhaps, but it is true, and the truth does not have to be kind to be true. So the question becomes inevitable. Is it worth living knowing all this? There is no universal answer. Some will continue to pretend. Others will continue to create. A few will simply breathe, accept, and continue without illusions. But after hearing this, you can't say you didn't know. Now the choice is yours. Return to the lie or carry the weight of reality. And here's the twist no one expects. Maybe the problem isn't the lack of meaning. Maybe the problem is our need to find one. Because what if you could live without needing answers? What if you could wake up every day knowing there is no greater purpose and still choose to continue? Not for hope, not for faith, but simply because you are here. And while you are, you can decide what to do with it. Sartre said we are condemned to freedom. It's not a joyful freedom, it's a heavy freedom, because it means there are no excuses. There is no destiny. There is no divine script. You are alone with your choices, and every choice carries the weight of all the other possibilities you abandoned. When you choose one path, you are killing all the others. When you say yes to something, you are saying no to everything else. And there is no one to tell you if you chose right. There is no cosmic judge. There is no final score, only consequences, and you living with them. But it also means you can choose. You can choose your anchors. You can choose your illusions. You can choose what is worth defending, even knowing that in the end nothing will matter. Camus took this even further. He imagined Sisyphus happy, a man condemned to push a rock up a mountain forever, knowing that it will always roll back down. And yet he continues. Not because he believes he will win, but because he chose to continue. Because he found dignity in the struggle itself, not in victory, in the struggle. And maybe that's it. Maybe real freedom is not living without illusions. It is living knowing that they are illusions, and choosing the ones that make your existence bearable. You can continue to deny. You can continue to isolate. You can continue to anchor. You can continue to sublimate. But now you know you are doing it. And that awareness, however small it may seem, changes everything. Because you are no longer trapped. You are choosing. And choosing, even when there is no right answer, is the only freedom left. Few can carry this clarity, because clarity does not bring happiness. It brings weight, but it also brings dignity. The dignity of looking at life without filters and saying, I know what this is, and yet I choose to continue. Not out of naivety, but out of courage. The courage to live consciously, even when awareness hurts. And it hurts, every day. Every time you realize you're using one of the 4 lies. Every time you catch yourself denying something obvious, isolating something painful, anchoring yourself to something you didn't choose, sublimating something that doesn't heal, you see. And seeing is the first step to no longer being completely blind, but it's also the first step to never again having total peace. Here's what no one tells you. Consciousness doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you happier. It doesn't give you superpowers. It just makes you more honest. And honesty, most of the time, is uncomfortable. You start to see the games people play, the masks they wear, the stories they tell themselves, and you realize that you play too. You wear them too. You also tell them. The difference is that now you know, and knowing changes the way you play. You can no longer pretend with the same conviction. You can no longer believe with the same intensity. You can no longer surrender with the same innocence, because the innocence is gone, and what's left is you, raw, exposed, too aware to go back and too scared to move forward. But there is something liberating about that. When you stop searching for absolute meaning, when you accept that maybe there is no greater plan, something strange happens. You stop waiting. You stop expecting life to be fair. You stop expecting suffering to have a purpose. You stop expecting rewards for your efforts. And when you stop expecting, disappointment diminishes. Because disappointment is the distance between expectation and reality. And if you have no expectation that life should be anything specific, it can simply be what it is. Neither good nor bad, just happening. And you are inside it, breathing, feeling, choosing. This is the true liberation that Zapffe never offered, because he stopped at the awareness of pain. He saw the problem with brutal clarity, but he didn't see the way out. Or maybe he saw it and chose not to accept it, because the way out is not transcendence. It's not enlightenment, it's not finding the hidden meaning. The way out is to accept that there is no way out, that you are here, temporarily, without guarantees, and that you can still do something with it. Not because it will last forever, but because it is what you have now. And now is all there is, the past is gone. The future has not arrived. There is only this moment, and in this moment you can choose. You can choose to feel, you can choose to act, you can choose to create, you can choose to love, not because it will save you, but because it's better than doing nothing. And maybe that's what Camus was trying to say. That rebellion is not against death. It's against resignation. It's against the idea that because nothing has meaning, nothing is worthwhile. Because it does. It is worthwhile. Not objectively, not cosmically, but subjectively. For you. Now, the food you enjoy, the music that gives you goosebumps, the conversation that makes you laugh, the touch that calms you. This has no universal meaning, but it has meaning for you. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the mistake has always been to seek meaning outside, in God, in purpose, in destiny, when the only possible meaning is what you create within, not because it's real, but because it's yours. And here's the hardest part to accept. You're going to die, and everything you built, everything you loved, everything you were, will disappear. There is no escaping it. There is no immortality. There is no eternal legacy, because the universe itself will die. The stars will go out. Time will end. And everything that ever existed will be as if it never existed. So what remains? To live as if it matters, even knowing that it doesn't. To love as if it were forever, even though you know it isn't. To create as if it would last, even though you know it won't. Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is not to live. It is merely to exist, waiting for the end. And that is not dignity. That is surrender. And you didn't go through all that, the denial, the isolation, the anchoring, the sublimation, the brutal awareness of the truth, to surrender now. You've come this far. And that already says something about you. Because most people give up before that. They go back to denial, they go back to comfort, they go back to lies. But you stayed, you looked, you felt the weight. And now you carry something you can no longer unload. The knowledge that your life is sustained by illusions. But also the knowledge that you can choose which illusions to keep. And that choice, however small it may seem, is revolutionary. Because it means you are no longer on autopilot. You are no longer just repeating patterns. You are conscious. And consciousness, however painful it may be, is the only path to something that resembles freedom. So what do you do now? How do you live knowing all this? First, you breathe. Because breathing is all you really need to do right now. Second, you look around. And you realize that despite everything, you are still here. You still feel. You still think. You can still choose. And third, you start small. You don't try to change your whole life at once. You don't try to get rid of all your illusions. You just choose one thing you want to do differently, one anchor you want to let go of, a pain you want to sublimate more honestly, a truth you want to stop isolating, a lie you want to stop repeating. Just one, and you start there. Maybe it's recognizing that you've been living to please people who don't really care, and deciding to stop, not dramatically, just little by little, saying no when you mean no, saying yes when you really mean yes. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary, because every small conscious choice is a step away from autopilot and closer to who you really are. Or maybe it's admitting that you've been isolating pains that need to be felt, that there are conversations you've been avoiding, mourning that hasn't ended, hurt that you haven't processed, and that maybe it's time to open those boxes, not all at once, but one by one, carefully, with compassion for yourself. Or maybe it's realizing that you're anchored in meanings that aren't yours, that you're living a life that was planned by social, family, and cultural expectations, and that you can gently begin to question. You don't have to abandon everything. Just ask, is this mine, or was it given to me? And if it's not yours, maybe it's time to give it back, to be grateful, and to find something that truly resonates with who you are now, not with who you were told you should be. And perhaps above all, it is recognizing that you have the right to create meaning, even knowing that it is not absolute, even knowing that it is temporary. You can choose what matters to you. You can choose what to fight for. You can choose what to love, not because it will last forever, but because it's yours. And while you're here, that's enough. Life won't get any easier. Consciousness won't spare you. You'll continue to see the illusions. You'll continue to feel the weight. You'll continue to know that everything is temporary, but you'll also continue to choose. And in conscious choice, there is dignity. There is courage. There is something that approaches freedom, not the freedom from suffering, but the freedom to choose how to suffer, and why, and with whom. And that, in the end, is all any of us really have. The ability to look at the absurdity and say, I see you, I know what you are, and yet I choose to continue. Not because I'm sure it's worth it, but because I'm here. And while I am, I'll make it something I can carry. Zapffe saw the wound, but he didn't see the possibility that consciously carrying the wound is different from just being wounded. Sartre saw the condemnation to freedom, but he also saw that being free, even when it weighs heavily, is better than being a slave to illusions you didn't even choose. Camus saw the absurdity, but he also saw that you can imagine Sisyphus happy, not because the rock stops rolling, but because he chooses to push. And in that choice, there is power, there is resistance, there is life, even when life doesn't make sense, especially when it doesn't. So here's my question for you. You don't have to answer right now, but take it with you. Which of the 4 lies do you use most to avoid looking directly at your life? And what would you discover about yourself if you stopped using it even for a day? Think about it, feel it. And when you're ready, maybe share it in the comments, because maybe you're not as alone in this pain as you think. Watch the next videos on the channel, count on me, and follow the White Rabbit.